The 1930s were a time of great change and uncertainty in the United States. The Great Depression gripped the country, and the American people faced economic hardship on an unprecedented scale. However, amidst this turmoil, another threat was increasingly emerging: the issue of highway safety. In this video, we take a trip back in time and explore the incredible photos of car crashes by Leslie Jones, a prominent photographer who worked for the Boston Herald-Traveler newspaper from 1917 to 1956. Jones was more than just a photographer. He was a documentarian of everyday life, capturing the essence of Boston and its neighborhoods. But what really set him apart from his peers was his amazing ability to turn the aftermath of automobile accidents into an art form. Leslie Jones had a peculiar fascination with documenting automobile accidents. In the 1930s, he traveled to the scenes of numerous traffic accidents, collisions, and crashes, capturing their aftermath in a series of photographs that ranged from the macabre and tragic to the bizarre and sometimes even comical. What sets Jones apart from his contemporaries and makes his photographs particularly interesting is his innate sense of composition and genuine human interest. As a photojournalist, he was constantly working under the pressure of looming deadlines, and newspaper editors were not known for their subtlety and did not appreciate the artistic skill of their photographers. However, you and I have a unique opportunity to look at his photos without any bills. And these photos clearly show that Jones carefully thought through the composition and always showed a deep interest not only in the corroded metal of the cars, but also in the actions and emotions of the people who were participants in the incident he was photographing. Jones may have taken hundreds of images of car accidents, but it is his attention to the drivers and passengers, as well as the crowd of onlookers and bystanders, that gives them a unique twist, turning these seemingly grim images into something almost lighthearted and sometimes humorous. As I mentioned earlier, the 1930s were marked not only by economic hardship, but also by a nationwide panic over traffic safety. In 1935, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote to state governors urging them to pay attention to the growing number of deaths and injuries associated with automobile accidents. In the 1910s, problems such as speeding, reckless driving, collisions, and pedestrian deaths were relatively new and required new solutions. Early attempts to solve the problem were limited to social measures aimed at controlling and improving driver behavior. By the early 1920s, the National Safety Council began collecting accident statistics, holding conferences and Safety Week campaigns in various cities across the country. Authorities hoped that increased public awareness would encourage more cautious driving. However, it was clear that the most obvious way to reduce fatalities was to control driver behavior through laws, fines, signals, and arrests for drunk driving. At the same time, the issue of the automobile being a source of increased danger not only to others, but also to its driver and passengers began to emerge. Americans were slow to realize the importance of changing the design of automobiles to make them safer. Initially, the automobile was perceived as a neutral device that simply responded to the driver's commands and could not cause an accident. However, in the late 1920s, manufacturers began to recognize that design flaws were reducing safety. One by one, they began to apply various engineering ingenuities to solve these problems. It all started with the installation of impact-resistant windshields instead of conventional windshields, which would shatter into dangerous shards at the slightest impact. The next step was the use of brakes on all four wheels of cars, instead of two, as it was before. In the 1930s, this approach evolved into a market trend as automakers began to actively solicit buyers by advertising new safety features for their vehicles, such as all-metal bodies and hydraulic brakes. However, one question remains: why weren't seat belts installed in cars, even though they had been invented as early as the 1930s? This is one of the most intriguing aspects of automotive safety history. While safety features such as impact-resistant windshields and improved brakes became standard, seat belts were generally absent in automobiles of those years. Automakers and industry representatives of the time assured motorists that modern cars were perfectly safe, emphasizing that road improvements, driver licensing, and traffic regulation were key factors in preventing crashes. However, the absence of seat belts remains a prime example of a missed opportunity to improve occupant safety and save lives. It is difficult to understand why seat belts, a simple and effective means of protection, were neglected at the time. Could it be cost, public perception, or a lack of understanding that they could save lives? What do you think? Write in the comments. But this situation couldn't go on forever. The 1930s was an era of dramatic change on American roads. The proliferation of automobiles combined with the lack of traffic laws and safety standards created a deadly combination. During this period, the number of traffic fatalities increased dramatically, and the country was in dire need of a solution. In response to this crisis, in 1935, President Roosevelt called on state governors to take immediate action to ensure highway safety. His words were echoed in the growing public concern over the increasing number of automobile accidents. It was a time when the American people were beginning to realize the deadly consequences of the growing popularity of the automobile. So what was the real fate of the seatbelt in those years? There is a hypothesis that the very first seatbelt was made in 1885 in the USA. Edward Claghorn patented its development in the form of a belt for tourists who traveled in open carriages. But there is another version. It says that Adolphe Piguet was the first to install belts. The French airplane pilot came up with such a design in order to be able to fly upside down for the longest time and set a world record. There is no end to this debate, however. For many years, seat belts were ignored by car consumers because of the categorical inconvenience of use. The belt simply constrained the actions of the person behind the wheel and rather harmed than protected in an accident. And no one wanted to install such devices at extra charge. Thus, the beginning of the full-fledged life of belts fell on the post-war years, when the well-known Henry Ford began to install belts in the basic equipment of his cars.